Hello, teachers. I'm here to talk to you today about asking good questions to our kids so that we get to the depth of knowledge that we want them to. So I'm calling this depth of knowledge or asking questions that lead to deeper thinking because that's really what we want our students doing. So when we think about planning our lessons, we know that we always start with that lesson objective. What do I want my students to know? When we begin with the end in mind, then we're going to jump all the way to the end and think, how am I going to assess this knowledge? What kind of tasks are going to reveal that my students understand this? Then we go back there and fill in the middle with those instructional strategies. But all along the way, we are asking ourselves, what questions can I create that will really help my students think deeply about this subject matter? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start with Bloom's because we're all really familiar with Bloom's. We know that there is a revised version. I think in the 90s sometime it was revised. So as we glance at these two triangles, what kind of changes were made? Well, we changed to verbs rather than just some words. All of the new Bloom's words are verbs. And that's great because that helps us when we're creating our lesson plans, when we're creating our objectives. We're actually going to know what we want our students to do if we use one of these Bloom's verbs. I also see that application, applying, analysis, analyzing, those stayed the same, but evaluation got a little knocked down and creating something brand new became the top point in our Bloom's taxonomy. So let's talk about what these knowledge dimensions actually mean when we think about our Bloom's verbs. First, we start with just factual knowledge. And this is going to be when we learn the vocabulary around this subject matter, some of the basic elements of it. Then we build into some conceptual knowledge. We take that basic knowledge and start putting it into some interrelationships. How's this word related to this word? How is this topic related to this topic? From there, we're going to learn our procedures. We're going to take that vocabulary and the interrelationships and start digging a little bit deeper. Start understanding what are the methods for inquiry? How do I learn about this topic? So some subject-specific knowledge is going to be applied there in that procedural knowledge. And finally, we get to our metacognitive knowledge. And that's when we take all of the other levels and we put them together. And that's when we can get into those top levels of Bloom's and hopefully start to really analyze and create something new. So let's think for a moment about what Bloom's would look like at all the different levels in a particular class. The examples that I'm about to give you here are from a middle school U.S. history class because that's what I taught. So if we start at the very beginning, remembering, I don't want to discount remembering because we got to remember stuff. We just don't want to stay there for forever. So a sample task at the remembering level would be list the 13 colonies. Great. We need to be able to do that to build on it. We just don't want to stay in this level. So building up to the next level, now that I know the 13 colonies, how can I demonstrate understanding? Well, now I can summarize the events that led up to the Revolutionary War. Great. Now that I know that information, how can I apply it? Well, I could compare some of the causes of the Revolutionary War to something that might be happening in our world today. How can I then analyze? Well, I'm going to move my picture so you can see this a little bit better. To analyze, I might ask my students, what were some of the differences between the Tories and the Patriots? This leads to a great debate that sometimes has to be shut down, but that's awesome. I love when that happens. How about evaluating? Well, how would I persuade someone to join my party? If I assigned two parts of my class to be the Patriots or the Tories, the Loyalists, how would you persuade someone to join your side? And then the two sides have to come up with ways that they would talk someone into joining their side. They really have to evaluate what their side stands for in order to be able to do that. How about creating something new? How would our country be different if the Revolutionary War was lost to the British? So now we're having to think about all of this information that led up to there, but we're thinking in a completely different way. So as I progress through a unit, I can think through the questions I want to ask my students and get to that applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating levels as soon as possible. Yes, we got to remember and understand. We just don't want to stay there too long. So as we're thinking about Bloom's, and we know that they're all in these verbs now, We can think of question stems or question starters that might help me ask better questions, because I know sometimes I'm in the middle of a lesson and I'm just really stuck in a certain mind of thinking. If I have these question stems in front of me, they're going to help me ask these better questions. I've actually created a document that you're going to get a link to, and it's going to do just that. It's going to help you, if you wanted to print it off, just to be reminded, yeah, I don't want to just ask, what does this mean? Or who did this? Or where did this happen? I actually want to ask these bigger questions to get my students to process more deeply. So here's a document that you can print off that just is a good reminder of how to do that. So once we've established those Bloom's verbs and how we use them, I want you to share that with each other. So at the end of our video, you have a link to a Jamboard. And I'm going to move my screen a little bit so you can see what it says. It's just what we have on the screen there. How have you used the Bloom's verbs and what impact have they had on your teaching? So at the end of our time together, you can go into that Jamboard and fill that out. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But now let's talk about Webb's depth of knowledge, because I like thinking about this because it does relate to Bloom's, but it puts it in a different way of thinking that I really connect with. So Webb's depth of knowledge is a quick review. We have levels 1 through 4, and you can see what they do there on the screen. It's a lot like what we have seen in Bloom's. So let's take a look at that. So I chose the verb identify, which is at the applying stage in Bloom's. And here on the screen, I've given you an example of how applying can actually be in every single one of our depth of knowledge levels. So it's a little bit different from Bloom's in that the word identify lives solidly in one place on Bloom's, but we can actually make it fit in a bunch of places here in Webb's depth of knowledge. I'm going to give you a moment just to read through these so you can see how those examples build on one another using that one verb. Here on the screen, you see now, it says Webb's depth of knowledge versus Bloom's taxonomy. I don't want that to sound like they're at war with each other because I actually think they go hand in hand. I just want you to see how they play together. So the only one that lives just by itself is remember. Every single other level touches on, every single other verb, touches on a different level of Bloom's taxonomy. In fact, look at DOK number 4. It actually covers everything except remember. So we can put this in a lot of different levels. Well, what are some sentence stems that we could use to make sure we're using Webb's depth of knowledge correctly? Here are some sentence stems there on the screen, and you can say that they echo a lot of those sentence stems we saw with Bloom's. As you scroll down in this document that I have linked for you, here's the Bloom's level questioning, and here's the DOK stems. So whichever one fits with you the best, whichever one you relate to the most, it doesn't really matter. The point is, we don't want to be stuck asking questions like, what is this? Where did this happen? How would you describe this? We want to be moving on into, how is this related to this? How would you describe the sequence of this? What's your interpretation, etc.? So just a real quick example. I put some examples there on the screen. I'm going to move my picture again. And so give you a moment just to read through what are some examples of activities that would promote higher order thinking, getting our kids to really think deeply about our subject matter. I'm going to give you a second just to read through those. Another document that I'm going to give you looks like this. I'm going to link it for you. What I want you to see is that it has Webb's depth of knowledge divided into its 4 levels, but it also has some websites that will go along with helping you perhaps create some distance learning activities using these different websites, most of which have a free version, if not all have some kind of a free version that you can tap into. That's also going to be linked for you in your Google form. The next thing we're going to talk about, how do we plan to tap into these higher order thinking skills in an upcoming lesson? Well, you're going to answer that question in our Jamboard as well. When you go into our Jamboard, I'm going to move my screen here for a second so that you can see over here on the side, the 4th icon down, we're going to click on that. We get a little sticky note that pops up. I can change the color if I want, and then I can type my answer when I click save, I don't know if it's going to let me because my picture might be in the way. When I click save, then it appears on my Jamboard. Now they all do populate in this same area, so you will have to move it. If you've said a lot, you can enlarge it. You can have a little fun with it. If you don't like what you wrote, just click on it and delete. It goes away. What I want you to see now is up here at the top of our Jamboard. Do you see how it says 1 of 2? I can click this little button right here and it will take you to our next Jamboard. So there are actually 2 Jamboards that you need to respond to. This first one about Bloom's verbs and the second one about how you want to tap into higher order thinking skills, how you want to ask better questions in an upcoming lesson that will lead your students into some deeper thinking. So what I want to say now is thank you so much for your time. Good luck with your Bloom's verbs and your depth of knowledge questions, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.